Here we go. After waiting and waiting and waiting, we now see clear signs that La Nina is collapsing. I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, February 12th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and like and subscribe to the channel. You get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. All right, let's get to work. Looking at significant wave heights in the North Pacific Ocean, we see remnants of a gale fading in the Gulf of Alaska with seas at about 24 feet. But we also see the beginnings of a new gale with seas pushing 36 feet, developing just west of the dateline and heading off to the northeast. This is one in a series of three great gales that have traversed the North Dateline region in the past few days. Doing a quick look at current conditions, we'll start at Waimea Bay buoy, number 106, of course in Waimea Bay on the north shore of Oahu. We're looking at all the energy hitting that buoy, anywhere from up to 33.3 second period energy, very long period energetic swell at 1/10 of a foot, and most energy toggling around a little bit at 18, a little bit at 14, a bunch of wind swell all mixed in. This is the low end of the graph here, 5-second period, pure just wind chop. Putting it all together, we see primary swell 5.4 feet at 8 seconds from 37 degrees. That's northeast. That'd theoretically be surf about 4 foot. We see a little secondary swell at 3.3 feet at 12.3 seconds. And that also is about 4 feet. So relatively small, chest to head high surf maybe on the North Shore. In Northern California, we'll look at the Half Moon Bay buoy, number 46012. Same deal, all the energy hitting. Now we see a nice bump of energy here out about the 20-second, 19-second period energy. This is from the first of the three gales that have traversed This is from the first of three gales, two of which have traversed the North Dateline region. That swell is starting to hit Half Moon Bay buoy, but we also see a whole bunch of wind swell mixed in and some leftover energy from a previous swell the day before. Putting it all together, primary swell 3.3 feet at 20.2 seconds. That's about 6.7 foot Hawaiian or 6.7 feet at regular breaks. 2 feet overhead. We also see a bunch of wind swell, 6.2 feet at 10.3 seconds, also about in the 1 foot overhead range. Going down to the north end of Southern California, buoy 46053, we see a bit of energy from a previous swell. This is from a swell in the Gulf. It's fading. Energy in the, we'll say 12, 13 second period range. Primary swell calculated at 3.3 feet at 10.4 seconds from the west, 272 degrees. Surf at about waist high or so. And then finally, on the south end of Southern California, buoy 191. Again, a bit of energy here in the anywhere from the 10 to 13 or 14 second period range. Primary swell 4.6 feet, 11.8 seconds. Theoretically, that's surf at head high, and we saw some waves about that high early this morning in Southern California. So let's go back in time to Wednesday night, the 9th of February. There was a gale off here in the Gulf. Most of the swell from the system has already hit Northern California. The last little bits are hitting down the south end of Southern California. But a new gale started developing here west of the dateline, with seas building to 42 feet right here, highest seas over the entire domain. Let's see if it went up anywhere from there. No, holding on late Thursday, and then notice taking this northerly track, pushed up into the Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf of Alaska on Friday into Saturday, with a secondary gale right behind that, producing anywhere from 28 to 30 foot seas. It too, this evening, fading in the Gulf of Alaska, with a third system now starting to develop over on the dateline. Swell from this first system, we'll actually wind this back here and take a look. From this system here is the one that is generating the 20-second period energy, hitting Northern California as we speak, and yet another swell is right behind that. Now, none of this swell is expected really in for Hawaii, maybe a little sideband energy, but it's already faded. This one, a better swell producer for Hawaii, and also for the U.S. West Coast, some swell energy, but not nearly as high as seas. All right, so let's look forward. What is going on in the jet stream? This is the best indicator of what's going to happen long term, or at least in the medium term over the North Pacific. All right, we're looking at jet stream level winds. These winds are up about 30,000 feet. They help support the formation of gales. When those gales form, they help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet, just like there and like there. What that helps do is create a counterclockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface, and that is the sign or the hallmark of low pressure. And of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, get traction on the ocean surface and generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, eventually get groomed out, turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, like Hawaii or the U.S. West Coast, turns into surf. So we have a moderately strong jet, not super strong, and almost looking like it's trying to pull apart or split even over Japan right here. But clearly the jet, and this is the problem, has been split and is splitting on the date line right here, with the northern branch going up into the Gulf of Alaska, the southern branch meandering down, pushing into Ba. But when you get this split flow, you typically get strong high pressure in between. With Hawaii right there and strong high pressure, that is the perfect setup for very strong trade there, and eventually there's a little trough over California as that pushes inland. Likely high pressure and north winds, the equivalent of trades, will be pushing strong down the California coast. What we want to see is more energy building into the jet here, and that would help consolidate all this and start dragging the split point further off to the east. Now, whether we see that or not is very much up for debate. That is also directly dependent on whether we get significant precipitation for the remainder of the winter season into California. Typically, what would drive a more energetic jet stream flow would be a thing called the active phase of the MJO. We're going to get into that in a bit, but it is starting to build here down in the western equatorial regions, so we'll keep our eyes open for that. But I think it's going to be more than a week before significant signs start showing in the jet, if they do at all. So we have one trough here in the Gulf of Alaska that's creating some seas there, and another trough associated with a building gale towards the date line. As we get into Monday, the trough builds but lifts northeast again, driven by this split in the jet, driven by not enough energy, driven by the inactive phase of the MJO that was previously in control. And as we get into Tuesday, that trough starts fading. The jet continues well split. If anything, the split point retrograding. So you see a trough pushing down the U.S. West Coast on Valentine's Day. Maybe good for a little precipitation or a little bit of dusting of snow down the Sierra, but that's probably about it. Then as we get into Wednesday and Thursday, well, another steep trough, not really supportive of gale development, starts pushing through the Gulf of Alaska. But the jet gets more consolidated. The split point moves from the date line to 170 west. Of course, we want it to move the whole way into California, but maybe we don't, depending on how strong the jet would become. Anyway, we get into Friday. Another trough starts building on the Gulf of Alaska. Backdoor trough off the U.S. West Coast, maybe good for some weather and precipitation there. And as we get into Saturday, more of the same. Notice winds building to 200 knots here as we get a week out. And the jet, the split point moving to 165 west. When we get into the long-term forecast and talking about the MJO, that will be key. Anyway, this big mega ridge still, look at this. This is what a ridge is, the opposite of a trough. There's your trough. There's the massive ridge. We think this is going to be driven by a eastward moving inactive phase of the MJO. Again, don't want to get into it now, but you get the idea. The jet still split for the next week. Most of the focus for storm development somewhere in the dateline region, with not a whole lot making or surviving it into the U.S. West Coast. Surface level pressure, surface level winds, not unexpected. Little gale fading the Gulf of Alaska with 30-35 knot west winds, getting some traction on the ocean surface. New gale building just west of the dateline with 45 to almost 50 knot west winds. And look at that, they build to just barely, you can see it under the tag there, 55 knots right about now. So we get into Monday, that gale lifts off to the north with 50 knot west winds. That would make it officially a storm. You see high pressure strong in the Gulf of Alaska. You see a building fetch of north winds, northwest winds, 30 knots, pushing down the U.S. West Coast. As we get into Tuesday, the gale continues over the dateline. New gale wraps up off the Kuril Islands and Kamchatka with 50 to 55 knot winds aimed off to the east, but high pressure still in control of this area for the most part. So we get into Wednesday, winds start fading a little bit along the California coast. Some sort of upper low here starts maybe pushing some of this fetch, this strong easterly trade pattern for Hawaii off to the north. But mainly the main focus is a gale off Kamchatka. That's still going. But as we get into Thursday, secondary fetch, notice two cores of the low. This is what they call a complex gale. Over the north dateline region, high pressure holding in the Gulf of Alaska. Friday, little local low here. We know there's a backdoor trough off here, sets up off of California, but really no solid swell producing systems for a bit there until we get into Sunday, the 19th of February. New gale starts building off Japan with 45 knot northwest winds, continuing into Monday with maybe another system behind that with high pressure holding control, but noticed it's pushed off to the east, not so much north of Hawaii anymore. All that driven by the split point, we think, in the jet moving off to the east as well. The pattern shifting from west towards the east, exactly as one would expect. Significant wave height forecast. All right, looking forward, we know we have a developing gale here over the north dateline region, getting shoved to the north or the northeast by the jet stream. Winds building to, or seas building to nearly 40 feet on Monday morning. And there we go, a little tiny area, 40-foot seas, pushing to 41. That's about it. 41 feet on Monday evening. Now this, again, is going to be one of these that looks like it's mostly going to bypass Hawaii, sideband energy. Mainly the focus, we'll say, is the Pacific Northwest, but maybe down as far south as Point Conception. It pushed over the north dateline, actually falls southeast a little bit. New gale wraps up off of Kamchatka. This is on Wednesday the 15th with 40-foot seas. Let's go back and look at this right there. Right there, the Aleutian Islands, once it gets north of about the 51 north line, it's going to be cut off by the Aleutian Islands. And this is a long ways away from the U.S. West Coast. Maybe a little bit of energy for Hawaii, also for the U.S. West Coast, but not a particularly giant swell producer. Secondary fetch that we looked at on Friday builds was 32-foot seas, briefly aimed off to the east. Then everything kind of collapses. A weak weather pattern sets up until this new gale starts building theoretically on Sunday, a week out, with 33-foot seas, 33.7-foot seas to be exact, approaching the dateline, and we suspect there's another system behind that. All right, the wind forecast for the U.S. West Coast and Hawaii. Hawaii being just pummeled by steady, non-stop, strong easterly trades, 20 knots here on Sunday, and you see this building fetch of 20 to 25 knot north winds off of California. Here's the high pressure system, a 1034 millibar high. Everything circulating around that low pressure, can't put a hole in it, and so it just sits there, driven by, and look at this, building by the inactive phase of the MJO. As we get into Monday, now it's up to almost 1040 millibars. Trades continue for the Hawaiian Islands at 20 knots, basically. North winds building at 30 knots along the entire California coast, pushing 35 knots in the evening. Trades backing off a little bit for Hawaii. As we get into Tuesday, wind machine just continues for north and central California, even working its way down into southern California, 30 to 35 knots. Trades turning a little bit more northeasterly at 15 to 20 knots for Hawaii. Tuesday evening, wind machine continues for north and central California and 35 knots even down into southern California. As we get into Wednesday, things start to break up a little bit. Now notice this is like an upper level low south of Hawaii. Trades, they're not even trades, they're like northeast, almost Kona winds pushing side shore down the north shore of Oahu, 20 knots. Pretty messy situation, but by Wednesday night, winds lighten up finally for the California coast. Hawaii continues to suffer. As we get into Thursday, a light wind regime is forecast for the entire U.S. West Coast. Hawaii almost looks like it's getting a little bit of a break as upper level and surface low just pushes the gradient a little bit north of the islands. That continues into Thursday, later Thursday. Friday, weak upper level low and surface level low off California might create some south winds. The wind machine sets up again for Hawaii on Friday as the low falls south. High pressure 1034 millibars, just bulletproof. Saturday, a relatively lighter wind regime for California. 25 knot trades for exposed east-facing shores on the Hawaiian Islands. And still, as we get into Sunday, maybe things, look at this, the core of the high was off over here, is now dead center in the Gulf of Alaska. Pretty brisk wind pattern still continues for the U.S. West Coast, not quite as bad as it was, but the trades looking to start moving perhaps east of the Hawaiian Islands as we get a week out. So a slowly shifting to the eastward pattern looks possible. Precip forecast for California. California right here, the Sierra right there. We'll just blast through this because the reality is there's a little dusting of maybe a backdoor front on Tuesday and maybe some light rain and snow and a little bit of it not even lingering into Wednesday morning. Very minimal. And then another low forecast off the coast, but almost nothing reaching the coast until right there on maybe Saturday night or Sunday, the 19th of February. Maybe a little bit of rain for Southern California. Hard to believe a model that goes out a week, but in short, not really any significant rainfall or snow forecast for the next week for California. The snow forecast dashboard for Olympic Valley. 1, maybe 2 inches, all somewhere associated with that backdoor front on Valentine's Day. We're not even going to go look at all the other resorts because they don't have anything more of that. It's maybe 1 inch at Kirkwood and 0 for Mammoth. So not any significant snow forecast for the next week. Looking at the temperature profile, this is the base of Olympic Valley down at about 6,200 feet, which is about lake level for Tahoe, and the summit up at about 9,000 feet here. The red, liquid precipitation, the gray, not quite freezing, sort of sleet. The white is where freezing temperature starts, and then the blue starts at about 28 degrees. You see the freezing level above the summit at Olympic Valley up at 10,000 feet. Through the 13th, Valentine's Day, things fall down. The snow level falls down to, or freezing level down to 3,000 feet or less. Slowly building up to maybe the 6,500 foot range, something like that by the 17th of February, and pretty much holding there. Maybe a spike out 10 days, but not particularly warm. Pretty cold and really cold here, but just sort of probably seasonal normal temperatures for right now. All right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the Madden Julian Oscillation and the El Nino Southern Oscillation? These are the two oscillations that are best for determining weather outlook in the Pacific Basin going out anywhere from 2 weeks to about a year or so. All right, we'll start by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, the Madden Julian Oscillation, that periodic weather oscillation that has 2 phases, active and inactive. It rotates, both of them rotate, one on one side of the planet, one on the other. They move west to east around the equator. It is the active phase that we're most interested in. The active phase is effectively a massive low pressure system. When it moves over the West Pacific, it dampens trade winds, and it also imparts energy to the jet stream. If you have a more energetic jet stream, well, it doesn't split, it stays together. That also helps feed storm development, and eventually those storms push into the California coast, creating precipitation there. The inactive phase is the opposite of that, a high pressure system. And what it does is it enhances trades and creates high pressure and steals energy from the jet stream. And it basically causes the jet stream to split like what we're having right now, creates mega high pressure over the Gulf of Alaska like what we're seeing now. So just looking at the jet stream flow, it goes, sure, looks like the inactive phase of the MJO is in control. Also, the active phase of the MJO, because it dampens trade winds, can take warm water that's normally all blocked and pushed over in the far west equatorial Pacific, can allow it to slosh off to the east in a ball of warm water known as a Kelvin wave. Kelvin waves eventually, if one is created, it pushes, travels under the equator following the thermocline, eventually 3 months later gurgles up off of Ecuador, rises or erupts to the surface, creates a patch of warm water there. If you have successive active phases of the MJO, they can create successive Kelvin waves, and that can be the sign or help kick off the start of El Nino. All right, so what are we doing here? This chart shows wind speeds. Data from the TAO buoy array, series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. It also has 5-day, or gives us 5-day average winds. So we're looking at just the arrow, the direction and the length of the arrow. The longer the arrow, the stronger the winds. So moderate trades over the East Pacific, moderate strong trades over the Central Pacific, and strong trades over the far West Pacific. But it's not the average winds, it's the anomalies, the difference from this wind speed compared to normal for this time of year. Looking in the West Pacific, well, look at that. We actually have a little westerly arrow suggesting trades are weak, if not weaker than normal in the West Pacific. They're lighter, they're normal to just a little bit above normal in the Central Pacific, but they're pretty strong in the West Pacific. All this indicates enhanced trades in the West Pacific, inactive phase of the MJO. Now, keep in mind, this is a 5-day average, so it incorporates data from 5 days ago. It is not reflective of what is happening right now. That will show up 5 days from now. Wind anomalies for the past 5 days. All right, this is up at the 850 millibar level, up about 4,700 feet. It gives a good idea of what's actually going on. South America here, Central America, Hawaii there. 0 is the equator, date line right there, New Guinea there, the Philippines there. The all-important Kelvin wave generation area. It's on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator from about where the Pacific starts. So we'll say about 125 west out to about 170 west in this area. If you get westerly anomalies in here and they hold decently for a good number of days, that's how you can create a Kelvin wave. But right now we see blue and the arrow is going from east to west. So these are easterly anomalies, stronger than normal trades, typically associated with the inactive phase of the MJO. That was on February 6th, the 7th, the 8th, same thing, and even the 9th. Not really a big change happening as per this chart. Let's go look at the forecast going out a week. All right, the all-important 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. Today, here we are, February 12th. This is past performance here. The blues are easterly anomalies, the inactive phase of the MJO. The oranges and reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase of the MJO. Where's the date line? Right here, running right up the middle. The West Pacific Kelvin wave generation area starts about 125 east, so right about there. Okay, and it's right in this area here, or you can go the whole way up the chart. Clearly, you can see easterly anomalies have been in control, and a massive easterly wind burst associated with the inactive phase of the MJO is fading as of today. Hooray! But what's even more important, westerly anomalies, which have been locked over the maritime continent, that's like Bali in that area, notice they started bulging off to the east, and as of today are filling at least half the Kelvin wave generation area, and are forecast to build even a little bit more to the date line over the next 7 days. This is just a 7-day forecast out there. This is the first time we've seen westerly anomalies of any kind out to the date line, I think, since the beginning of La Nina 2.5 years ago or more. So this looks like the active phase of the MJO trying to push across the Kelvin wave generation area. And notice the lack of any easterly, a little pocket of easterly anomalies, but the presence of westerly anomalies this far across the Pacific is what we've been talking about. We talked about paint drying, and some people made some comments. Well, finally, it looks like the paint is dry as of today, or very nearly so. We have arrived. Right, so let's go look 2 weeks out. Outgoing long wave radiation going out in 15 days. So what's that mean? That's cloud cover, basically. If you have more clouds, you have less sunlight reflecting off the ocean surface, you have less outgoing long wave radiation. Okay, the blues are cloudy areas, the reds and oranges, not cloudy areas. So you think this is where low pressure is because you have clouds rising, moist air. The high pressure sinking, cool, dry air. So this would be the inactive phase of the MJO. This would be the active phase of the MJO. Let's get ourselves oriented. South America, Central America, Hawaii, the equator running right across there. Kelvin wave generation area right in there. So as of today, it looks like the active phase of the MJO is building over the Kelvin wave generation area. Forecast to continue 5 days from now, 10 days from now, 15 days from now, this per the statistic model. The dynamic model suggesting basically the exact same thing. The two models are in sync, suggesting the active phase of the MJO is to be in control for at least the next 2 weeks. These are phase diagrams for the same two models, just a sort of more zoomed-in, detailed view. How do you read this? Well, the MJO moves from the Indian Ocean over the maritime continent to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. You can see the past path of it in January and into February. The further away the dot is from the circle, the stronger it is. So we had a pretty good pulse of the active phase over the Indian Ocean late January. Wherever the active phase is, well, in fact, so here it is right now, in the eastern maritime continent. Wherever the active phase is, the inactive phase is basically on the other side of the planet. So we'll say basically over Africa. This is 3 different forecast projections from the statistic model, all of them having the active phase being over the West Pacific about a week from now, and then maybe in the East Pacific, but a big variation from either very weak, right here where the circle is, to modestly strong out here in the green projection. Now the dynamic model, right here, same starting place, projects pretty much the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A week net from now, active phase of the MJO, modestly strong in the West Pacific, and then collapsing in the West Pacific, or moving over to Africa or something like that, but exceedingly weak. Anyway, the next week looks to be prime. The upper level model showing areas favorable for precipitation. Green, favorable for precipitation, that would be the active phase of the MJO. The oranges over Africa, not favorable for precipitation. South America there, Central America there, Hawaii, one little pixel there. New Guinea there, Kelvin wave generation area right there. Now this runs about a week ahead of what happens on the surface. This is up at Jetstream level. So active phase of the MJO over the West Pacific, making its way across the Pacific into about the first week of March. Inactive phase of the MJO showing up, somewhere late February, making its way across the Pacific into the end of March, and then a new weak active phase perhaps developing over the Kelvin wave generation area after that. All right, the 30-day forecast going, from the CFS model. All right, and let's get ourselves oriented. Date line right here. The blues, east or west, are the easterly component of the wind, easterly anomalies. The reds, the westerly component of the winds. All right, now we have the benefit here, the solid contours, the active phase of the MJO. The dotted contour, the inactive phase of the MJO. And the West Pacific starts right about here, so this is the Kelvin wave generation area. But we can go, looking back in time, we see steady, strong easterly anomalies on the date line, and that was as of the past week. That's been the case, driven by the inactive phase of the MJO. Now, here we go. Here's the active phase of the MJO, just starting to enter the Pacific now with theoretically strong westerly anomalies developing, traversing the Kelvin wave generation area into the end of February, 25th of February, with strong westerly anomalies forecast on the dateline. Now, here's the interesting thing. Back in December and January, when we had that massive atmospheric river event in California, this was the active phase that created it. And yes, it had westerly anomalies. They didn't proceed very far across the Pacific, but they were solid and they were strong. This active phase, in comparison, looks to be even stronger and holding together not only across the dateline to a point even south of California. The point being that is wherever the active phase is from a time perspective in the Pacific, north and south of that is where all the weather is. So theoretically, if you believe this, when westerly anomalies in the active phase of the MJO get, well, California is about 122 west, 120 west. So somewhere about the end of February, theoretically, we could maybe have a consolidated jet stream and an atmospheric river event pushing into California. Now, that's a super much of a reach. We're not saying that's going to happen, but if it were going to happen, this would probably be the window when it would happen. Now, the other thing to consider is mega high pressure that's north of Hawaii, the strong trades there. That's the same thing applies. When you have massive easterly anomalies, north and south of that, this is on the equator, remember, that's where you get your high pressure. So if this is a massive high pressure split jet stream event here, then theoretically, if you have equally strong westerly anomalies in the, we'll say the 18th to the 25th of February, then that would be the prime time for storm development on the dateline. And as the active phase of the MJO pushes east under California, then it would drag the center of that circulation onshore over California. Maybe not good for surfing, but maybe good for precipitation. We'll take it. And then let's go even further out. Let's go out 3 months. So this is the same CFS model, 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies, but past performances on the bottom. The forecast, the futures here, yellows, westerly anomalies, blues, easterly anomalies. So you can see the preponderance of easterly anomalies, and this final massive or mega high pressure easterly anomaly event that's happening or just about over right now. You get past here, and what do you see? Nothing but westerly anomalies. This, we think, is the last, literally the last breath of La Nina. And in the next 3 to 4 days, it's all over, theoretically, at least from a at least from an MJO perspective, let's say. And notice, westerly anomalies take over after that. Now, the ocean and a bunch of stuff, I mean, the atmosphere isn't going to respond just like that. It's going to take time. It's going to take months for 3 years or 2.5 years of La Nina to sort of finally fade, and we transition over into a neutral state and then into perhaps an El Nino-based state. But you get the idea here. Now, let's overlay the MJO. Same deal. Inactive phase of the MJO, fading out, pretty much gone about, what would that be, about the 15th, 16th of February. Active phase of the MJO with 1, 2, 3 contours. A contour stronger than the last active phase of the MJO. And look at this, holding together the whole way, not only across the Pacific, the whole way around the planet. That would be a serious and the first real legitimate solid active phase of the MJO we've seen in 3 years. Typically, La Nina is characterized by a preponderance of the inactive phase of the MJO and the suppression of the active phase of the MJO. When you get a strong and long-lasting active phase like this, that would be a clear signal that perhaps La Nina is dead. And we have a lot more evidence of that coming in the presentation. Anyway, after that, as we get later into February and March, weak inactive phase of the MJO, but whoa, look at this. Westerly anomalies the whole time. This is basically the same thing we've been showing you for week after week for the past 3 months. It's coming to fruition. It's happening as we speak, and it'll be all but transitioned from an MJO perspective in the next 3 or 4 days. Let's overlay the low-pass filter. Even more suggestion. The dotted contour here, high-pressure bias. It's been, right there's the dateline. It's been over the dateline for 2.5 years now. Notice the second contour here. So we get about to the early part of March, it's out of the Kelvin wave generation area, about 170 west. It's out of there. The second contour moving off to the east, it's out of the Kelvin wave generation area by about the 1st of April. And as we get into May, it's basically limited to a little window over top of California or south of California, and that's it. And the solid contour here, the low pressure bias. Now notice here, it's been more or less stationary for years now, is supposed to start making a big change. And about a week from now, significant progress is going to start being making with a low pressure bias moving into the West Pacific. And as we get into later in, well, I'm just eyeballing this here, let's say mid-April, something like that, filling the Kelvin wave generation area with a second contour building right behind it. This clearly looks like the beginning of a El Nino pattern. All right, so what's going down in the ocean? We've talked a little bit about what's going on at the surface and long-term trends, but what's actually happening? So we're going to start by looking down in the ocean, down 100, 200, 300 meters. Data, these are sea surface temperatures, the profile of water temperatures. We've talked about Kelvin waves and they being a ball of warm water that follows the thermocline. Well, this is the sort of like the isobars in the thermocline. Deep warm water in the West Pacific, shallow warm water in the East Pacific. The 28-degree isotherm actually has backtracked from 175 east to 170 west, driven by that mega ball of high pressure and easterly anomalies over this area right now. The 26-degree isotherm holding about where it was last week at about 152 west, but the 24-degree isotherm, if anything, continues to get thicker here in the West Pacific, suggesting warm water, no matter what's happening at the surface, is already flooding off to the east and getting deeper over in this region. Now, those are actual temperatures. It is the anomalies that really matters, the difference from normal for this time of year. For 2 years, we've had nothing but below negative, like -2, -3 degree anomalies over here in the East Pacific, with all warm water balled up here in the West Pacific. Well, look at this. 3 degrees centigrade anomalies. Now, this is the core of it, but the leading edge of it, somewhere around, let's go look up here, 132 west, connecting to a previous ball of warm water that erupted off of Ecuador. So this was Kelvin wave number 2. We think this is Kelvin wave number 3, making its way across the Pacific. Now, let's be patient because it takes 3 months for a Kelvin wave to make it from over here to the East Pacific. So we're about midway on that flight with this second Kelvin wave. This would be the Kelvin wave that was created by the active phase of the MJO that created the atmospheric rivers in California back in the Christmas time frame. Okay, and we know another active phase of the MJO is developing right now, which is going to create more westerly anomalies, which theoretically could create yet a third Kelvin wave. And remember what we said earlier, when you have multiple active phases of the MJO creating multiple Kelvin waves, and they all start building and erupting off of Ecuador, that can help usher in El Nino. That is exactly what we think is happening. Here's another version of the same data. Now, this lags about a week behind because it's satellite-based, and it just takes the satellites a week to cover enough of the Pacific to get a good mapping of what's going on. But it shows the same Kelvin wave. It's leading edge at about 120 west right now. The last little remnants of cool water from the previous upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle fading out here, week-old data, and the Kelvin wave number 1, its remnants here off of Ecuador, almost connected. We expect by next week you see a full steady flow the whole way across the Pacific. Sea level anomalies. This is satellite-derived data. This is what is being used to feed that subsurface view that we just looked at. Okay, South America, let's see, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Central America, mainland, Hawaii there. Dateline right there, the equator right there. This is, you strip out all the waves, the wind waves, the tides. Is the sphere of the Pacific Ocean higher or lower than normal? And why does that matter? Well, you can derive or infer water temperatures down deep in the ocean by that. If you have warm water at depth, it expands, and that'll create a bump on the ocean surface, just like what we're seeing right there. So you can infer there's a lot of warm water there. Likewise, cold water down deep by pure physics, it contracts. That'll create a divot. It'll displace water negatively on the ocean surface, creating a divot, and that divot can infer cold water at depth. So what do we have right now? And this is only 5 degrees north and south of the equator. That's all that really matters. Well, clearly, a lot of warm water in the West Pacific, but look at this. A nice, clear, delineated finger of warm water pushing off to the east with a second little bubble right here, making it to, where is that? About 120 west, so a point south of California. This looks like that new Kelvin wave we were just looking at with its leading edge at 120. And then the last remnants of the previous Kelvin wave, not creating positive anomalies, but look at it, there is a little bubble there, and neutral anomalies around this area, suggests that temperatures are warming significantly, and the La Nina cool pool is in collapse. To drive that point home yet one step further, upper ocean heat anomalies, upper 300 meters of the ocean surface. Is there water colder or warmer than normal? West Pacific here, East Pacific here. We're going back in time to a year ago. Yes, there was warm water all balled up in the West Pacific. A little Kelvin wave did make it around or across the Pacific in February. Another one tried last spring, sort of 2 pulses, and it didn't even make it. Massive upwelling response. Cold water just locked down the Pacific. But look what's happening now. We had our first little baby weak Kelvin wave, even weaker than this one. This was from the Christmas active phase of the MJO. A little upwelling response. That's quickly in collapse. We see a much broader response of warm water, making it to 130 west as of right now, and likely going to just barrel its way right on across the Pacific into Ecuador. And with another active phase of the MJO in play right now, and plenty of warm water in the West Pacific, well, there's 1, 2, we think a third Kelvin wave is going to be right behind that. And it takes 3 months to make it across the Pacific, so if that Kelvin wave develops, we'll say end of February, so then it's March, April, so another Kelvin wave arriving in May, just in time for summer. So what's going on at the surface? Sea surface temperature anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. Now let's be clear, El Nino is characterized by warmer than normal temperatures off of Ecuador. La Nina, colder than normal water temperatures. Well, let's take a look here. Here's Chile, Peru, Ecuador right here, Central America, Hawaii there, equator roughly in this area. Well, here's the Galapagos. The oranges and reds above normal temperatures, pushing the whole way out to a point south of California. Pretty well developed with a massive amount of warm water off of Peru and Chile, the whole way over the South Pacific. Now, that is not in the official El Nino region. But what is also happening here is, notice these colder than normal waters. This is the La Nina signal. It was down to below 20, almost down to 25 south at one point in time. Now it's up at, we'll say 18 south and getting pushed, and it was all like just massively choked along Chile and Peru here. That's all gone. Warmer water taking over. Now this could easily be wiped out by a strong inactive phase of the MJO and a big upwelling event. But if you have multiple Kelvin waves in flight, odds are that is not going to happen. In fact, there's a pipeline of warm water. This is the upwelling, the eruption of the very first, the weakest of the Kelvin waves. And we know there's another one coming. It's about a month to 6 weeks out. And we suspect a third is behind that. So this might be just the start of a warming event in the Pacific. The last of the lingering La Nina cool waters out here south of Hawaii and out beyond the dateline. 7-day sea surface temperature trend, pretty much the same as it's been since before Thanksgiving. Warming off of Chile and Peru, warming for sure off of Ecuador, the whole way out to about 140 west. This is all a good thing. There is literally no cooling, no fuel left for La Nina. And then the backed off view, the unmistakable sign here of a building warm event off of South America. Warmer than normal temperatures for this time of year. And this has been steadily building for 2 months now, with a steady stream of at least one more Kelvin wave, probably two, bound for this area. And the active phase of the MJO doing as much as it can right now, generating enhanced trades. So yeah, there's cooling here, but it's not any cooler than it's been. In fact, it's holding. So and this easterly wind event is effectively over. This is, we think, as bad as it's going to get from here forward. And if anything, warming is just going to continue to build. Now that's good because that feeds the jet stream. When you get a lot of warming and evaporation here off of Ecuador, it starts moving the Walker circulation off to the east. And I don't want to really get into that, but basically it sets it up so there's lots of fuel over here and nothing holding it back over here to allow the jet stream to just roar either across the North Pacific or across the South Pacific in summer months. So all this is taking us exactly where we want to be. The sea surface temperature trend since before Thanksgiving, well, today's value at 849 thousandths of a degree above normal. In the La Nina threshold, or I'm sorry, ENSO neutral is half a degree, between half a degree below and half a degree above normal. The El Nino threshold is anything above half a degree above normal, but it's got to be for like five consecutive 3 months periods, so basically for a year. Now, this is not the official El Nino region. This is the area right there off the Galapagos. But all this says is temperatures are almost a degree above normal in that region. This is the official El Nino monitoring region. We have officially decided that this data is complete bunk and is incorrect, or something is wrong with it. It's corrupt, and you'll see why in a minute. So we're just, if you use the power tool and you look at this, disregard this. Here's this, now you can't really read this. This is some data from NOAA, but you get the general idea. The Nino 1.2 region right there by Ecuador. Since November, you see the steady upward trend. This must be the zero line here, so above zero for sure. The Nino 3.4 region, now this is like the same region they were just looking at that we said is garbage. You can see a steady upward trend here. I think this is the half a degree below, or the half a degree below normal position, and this, as of the latest reading, is almost right there. And once you get to half a degree, if you can stay in there below normal, then you're considered ENSO neutral, neither El Nino nor La Nina. So here is one little piece of the puzzle that tells us we think La Nina is dead. So what does the atmosphere think is going on? We look at the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, which is basically in the Indian Ocean, and Tahiti, which is in the Pacific Ocean. When pressure is lower over Tahiti, the index here goes negative. When pressure is higher over Tahiti compared to Darwin, then the index goes positive. Today it's positive at 15.90. Okay, and looking back over the past month, well, if anything, it looks like it's rising. Why would that be? Well, we're just coming out of the inactive phase of the MJO, right? So that, of course, would drive the index more positive. The 30-day average sort of takes the noise out of this. Notice this thing kind of jumps all over the place. So today's value, 12.32, and rising. Let's go back a month. Well, we were up at 20, so that would probably be the inactive phase of the MJO. And then at Christmas, well, let me see, this is only a 30-day average, so that wouldn't affect Christmas. So this would be, it went down into the 9 range, going up again. Inactive phase of the MJO that we just went through is probably being reflected here. And then the 90-day average, well, we're at plus 14.90. I mean, we want to see all these things negative. They're not there yet. Where were we a month ago? We're at 12.57. So all this is still reflective of the La Nina base state. Now remember, a 90-day average, that's taking data from 3 months ago, and that's still in the average when we clearly were in La Nina. So this is basically 3 months behind what's happening right now, but it gives you it's a lagging indicator. It tells you sort of after the fact to confirm what you think is going on. The 30-day average, this is your El Nino, La Nina, I'm sorry, your active phase, inactive phase indicator, but it's a 30-day average, so it's 30 days lagging too. So it's telling us what was going on in early January. Okay, again, still not real time. Here's the 30-day average graphed out. The downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. Notice pushing it to zero or theoretically below zero. Notice we have not been below zero for 2 years now or longer. And also notice that the upward spikes are stronger than the downward spikes. The inactive phase of the MJO stronger than the active phase. Of course, that makes sense because we've been in La Nina. But we think we're moving towards El Nino, so what we think we want to see is now the downward spikes being stronger than the upward spikes, the active phase of the MJO. So here's a little bump up, but we think we're going to start seeing this falling as the current active phase of the MJO builds over the West Pacific and hopefully gets us down to zero. And finally, the CFS version 2 forecast for the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nino 3.4 region. Clearly, there is good information here. This is sea surface temperatures in the official El Nino monitoring region that have already occurred, all right? Half a degree below normal to half a degree above normal is considered ENSO neutral if you're there for a certain amount of time. We have been roughly at the -1 degree mark with other than a couple of exceptions for 2 years now. Notice that today this has been updated with actuals, and as of right now, this would be mid-February, we are officially in ENSO neutral from a sea surface temperature perspective. That's why I said that previous chart that was showing the trend is bunk, because this is using real actual data. And the forecast, even better yet, has us at dead neutral, 0 degrees by April. And this isn't like some little point in the ocean. This is the whole central Pacific equatorial. This is thousands upon thousands of square miles of sea surface temperature at dead neutral. And then as we get into June, moving into barely into the El Nino category, half a degree above normal, and then sort of leveling off 3/4 of a degree above normal. But then as we get into the fall, temperatures up to almost 1 degree above normal. That's pretty warm. And this is the more conservative estimate. So we'll go up here. This is the raw data, and it has temperatures up to 1.25 degrees above normal. And that's not even at the peak of El Nino. That's just in the fall with another 2 months to go before El Nino, theoretically, if it were to form, peaks out. So the point being, it looks like a pretty solid El Nino event is trying to develop. So here we go. It appears the dam has broken. The active phase of the MJO is building, and a solid active phase it is across the equatorial West Pacific, expecting to traverse the equatorial Pacific to a point even south of California 2 to 3 weeks from now. Theoretically, consolidating the jet stream, theoretically feeding energy to the jet, theoretically pumping the storm track up, producing larger real surf, and then theoretically some precipitation into California. And this is what we had been talking about for months and months. We thought that we'd be in this like La Nina base state. Then somewhere come late February, the dam would break and we'd move into this sort of position. Now, it hasn't happened yet. All the models are saying it's getting ready to happen now. We are sort of taking a reach here and projecting that there will be solid surf before this winter ends up, that it's not over yet. Do not get disheartened because it feels like springtime right now, strong winds, high pressure and control, no precip, and maybe that will hold and maybe none of what we're saying will happen. But if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in late February and the early part of March. So we're not despondent yet. We think there's one last blast for significant swell production here. Still, the winter is going to be less than a typical year, a pretty down year for big wave production. But you take what you can get. There's one more hope here. We're going for that. Now, shorter term, it looks like a series of gales have traversed or are in the process of traversing the North Dateline region. So there'll be some swell from that. The unfortunate part is that mega high pressure system driven by the mega easterly wind event that's happening on the dateline is occurring in sync, and a lot of that swell is kind of going to be hard to get to or buried in chop. But as we get further out, maybe a week out from now, things will settle down. Looks like hopefully trades will settle down for Hawaii. The Jetstream will reheal itself and sort of push the high east of Hawaii and hopefully even east to California a couple of weeks from now, and we'll be back in the money. All right, so that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the forecast, give us a thumbs up. We'd appreciate it. We opened up a super thanks event. Haven't used it yet, haven't even tried, but it gives you the ability to donate $1 or $2 to Stormsurf if you're interested. It would be greatly appreciated, but we're not here pandering for money either. We do this because we enjoy it. All right, so that's it for this week. Enjoy the Super Bowl, and we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.